Hey, Originals listeners. Last week, director Peter Bogdanovich died at 82. I can't say I knew him well, but I did love his films. And I have to say, I kind of fell in love with him after spending one incredible afternoon with him in February of 2019, the results of which yielded an absolutely astonishing interview that was originally published in New York Magazine. And you're about to hear things in this interview that are going to delight you, shock you, perhaps even disgust you. But I challenge you not to love spending time in this legend's company, listening to his magnificent baritone just as I did. We began, as many conversations about Bogdanovich begin, with Orson Welles. Bogdanovich initially wanted to be an actor, but only saw his career take off in 1961 when he organized a Welles retrospective at MoMA and wrote the accompanying monograph. He was soon writing long profiles of directors he admired like John Ford and Jerry Lewis for magazines like Esquire, and found more to love in the working company of this older Hollywood generation. He was actually considered a bit of a square by some of his contemporaries. With others, like Exorcist director Billy Friedkin, as you'll hear later, he developed a mutual distaste. He continued his relationship with Welles for decades, and Bogdanovich's collected conversations with Welles, which he titled This Is Orson Welles, was considered by Welles himself to be tantamount to his autobiography. In 1971, when Bogdanovich released The Last Picture Show at age 34, it was immediately treated with the kind of reviews that hailed him as a genius. And so began the Welles comparison. Welles, of course, was only 25 when he made what many still consider the best film ever made, Citizen Kane. And whether you agree with this take or not, both Welles and Bogdanovich are now seen as cautionary tales of what can happen to careers when success comes so early. This is The Originals, and I'm your host, Andrew Goldman. I spent decades interviewing celebrities for magazines, the vast majority of whom were just there to sell something and shared so little of themselves. So I created The Originals to interview cultural figures who actually had something to say, wanted to express something real. If there is a platonic ideal of an Originals guest, Peter Bogdanovich would be it. Outspoken, candid, controversial, introspective, and armed with more than a few axes to grind. Welcome to the 9th episode of our 3rd season, produced in proud partnership with Los Angeles Magazine. So we begin not at Bogdanovich's birth, but in October 1971 with the release of The Last Picture Show and his birth as a star. One listener note: due to your host's extreme technological ineptitude, the sound at a few moments in this episode is going to be far from ideal, but using some software that I personally don't understand, we did our very best to improve the quality. It must have been incredibly heady getting those notices. I mean, the one notice that I'm sure everybody remembers is the Newsweek notice, right?
Jesus Christ. You know, I was...
I want to see if I can find it.
I know what it is.
You know it by heart? Okay. I want to see
if I don't know it by heart.
The Last Picture Show is a masterpiece. They used exclamation points. It is not merely the best American movie of a rather dreary year. It is the most impressive work by a young American director since Citizen Kane. Exclamation point.
Yeah, it was pretty good. I was we were already shooting What's Up, Doc when that came out. And I was in a little cabin that I had on the soundstage at Warner's. And Bert Schneider calls me up and he says, "Are you sitting down?" I said, "Well, I am now." He said, "Here's the opening line of Newsweek." And he read me that passage. I said, "Jesus Christ, really?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Wow." And then knock on the door. "We're ready, Peter." And I went out and shot a scene. And I think as I got into this shooting scene, I thought, I must be pretty good. That's a hell of a review.
So yeah. What does Orson Welles say when he sees somebody
Well, he sent me a telegram around that time. And he said, "Reading your reviews is like opening presents at Christmas."
It's amazing. I mean, He has been quoted saying that he felt like critical reception as possibly the finest American movie ever made was sort of a millstone around his neck.
I know.
Do you agree with that? I mean, it felt like everything he did was compared.
Well, that's what they did that to him, and Amberson was recut and so on. He had a tough time. He told me the story. He said Billy Rose, the producer, saw Kane and he said, "Quit, kid. You'll never top it."
Do you feel like having had this kind of universal praise was a curse, the same way that it was a curse for Wells?
No, because I had 3 successful pictures in a row, and they were all very different. And then I had 3 unsuccessful pictures in a row, and they were all very different. And then I made 2 that were quite successful in a way, critically, as far as I was concerned. I thought they were the best things I'd done, or at least as good as. Then I had a hit with Mask. The thing is, Orson never had a successful movie except for the notices on Citizen Kane. He never had a successful movie. I've had a number of them.
As you'll soon hear, Bogdanovich had a thing for models. Of course, Cybill Shepherd would go on to have a long career as an actress, but when she appeared as J.C. Farrow in The Last Picture Show, she was a model with 0 acting credits, discovered on the cover of Glamour, depending on whose version you believe, either by Bogdanovich himself or by his then-wife, production designer Polly Platt. Whoever initially spied Shepherd isn't ultimately what's important, but what is important are the contributions Platt made to Bogdanovich's 3 films, Last Picture Show, Paper Moon, and What's Up, Doc? Coincidence or not, the first 3 films after Platt left him, Daisy Miller, At Long Last Love, and Nickelodeon, were all commercial flops, and 2 of them happened to star Cybill Shepherd. Platt died in 2011, but if you have any interest in hearing her version of these events, I cannot recommend more highly Karina Longworth's podcast, You Must Remember This, which devoted an entire season to Platt's unpublished, unfinished memoir and called it The Invisible Woman. Regardless, as you're about to hear, Bogdanovich fell head over heels in love with Shepherd, and he lost not only his wife, but his production designer and for a time his career. And if there's hubris to be found in Bogdanovich's story, it would probably be detected most notably in the year 1974. And this was the year he appeared on various magazine covers with Shepherd, produced an album of her singing Cole Porter tunes called Cybill Does It to Cole Porter. That same year, he guest hosted The Tonight Show, and as you'll hear in the following clip, if Bogdanovich were listening just a little harder to guest Burt Reynolds and not been so deeply in love, he might have corrected his course a bit.
They're waiting to kill us both.
No, listen, it's part of it's what I call the envy barrier.
Yeah, what is that? What is that? Success.
When you're as successful as you are, and you have a gorgeous lady, as you do have.
Who is that?
What is her name? Cybill.
Yeah, let's not discuss what.
Cybill.
Yes,
Right.
yeah, go ahead.
You have her. You have 4 pictures in a row that make like $30 million. A guy has to learn to hate you.
So watching The Last Picture Show, watching Cybill Shepherd, she's so beautiful in that movie, it almost hurts to watch her. It's almost painful. It's the kind of yearning one experiences looking upon her. Did you experience that shooting it?
I was pretty attracted to her.
Well, obviously, but...
We talked about this recently, Cybill and I. The first shot, I don't know if it's the first shot we made with her, but it was the first shot in the movie theater. When she comes up to the aisle and then in a close-up, she said, what you all doing back here in the dark? What you two doing back here? Something like that. And just before that, we had been talking, and she'd been sitting, we were in the theater. I was sitting in the theater, and she was in the row ahead of me, in fact, and she turned around to talk to me while they were lighting. I don't know why I said this at this moment, but I said, I don't know who I want to sleep with more, you or JC. She absolutely blushed. And they said, okay, we're ready, Cybill. So that shot was done right after that moment.
Well, you can either try to explain it as you actually trying to elicit that reaction, or you can say that that you were wooing her.
Well, that was a pass.
Yeah, it was definitely a pass.
Yeah, well...
And she had been dating
Jeff
Bridges on set, correct?
Yeah.
Did you know?
Yeah. Jeff went, subsequent to that, Jeff went and had a week of military training as a kind of getting out of the draft. He had to train. So he left for a week or so. And after he told me that, I said to Cybill, we were in the hotel somewhere, and I said, you're going to be alone for a while. Jeff's leaving. She said, I'm always alone. And I thought, that's definitely a hint. I'm always alone, she said. And that gave me the hint to move forward, and I did.
Now, okay, how How do you actually manage, from a practical standpoint, to have an affair with an actress if your wife is actually the production designer on the
It
film?
wasn't easy, but she obviously was leading me on a bit, and I was definitely interested. And then we started this affair, and Polly figured it out. And then she moved out of my hotel, our suite, and she sort of left it up, you deal with it, as though it was an issue, which it was. I didn't know how to deal with it. I didn't know when it was going to end. And Cybill and I kept saying, this is just during the picture. It's not going to go on after the movie's over. But we were both, we fell in love. She thought it would be over when the movie was over.
Mm-hmm.
And I did too, so did Cybill. But when we got back to our lives, and she in Tennessee and me in LA, we just couldn't stop seeing each other. We met at the Holiday Inn in Hollywood, and I told Polly I was going away for a few days to spend some time thinking. And we spent the weekend at the Holiday Inn. She got me stoned for the first time in my life.
What'd you think?
It was one of the great experiences of my life.
You were a little square, weren't you?
Yeah, I was square. Bert Schneider, who was heavily in drugs, not to the point of incapacity, but he and Bob Rafelson and all those guys at PBS were definitely into grass. And they offered it to me, and I said, no, I don't do that. And they talked about not doing the picture with me because I'm square.
Yeah.
And then I not only got stoned, but I had an affair and left my wife. So I wasn't square after all.
Was she like JC? I mean, JC was
She was a little bit, yeah.
In what way? Because JC was, what's the word?
Well, she was certainly flirtatious.
Well, flirtatious, but also a little destructive, a little careless.
Yeah, that's what I liked about her.
About JC or about?
Both.
Yeah?
Well, I told you that story about when she came to audition for me.
Tell me.
Well, I was at the Essex House in New York. I came from LA to New York to interview some actors. One of them was Cybill, because I had seen her on the cover of Glamour, and I thought I'd like to meet her.
See, because I read the story that Polly, your wife, had seen her on the cover of Glamour.
She takes credit for that. It's bullshit.
Really?
Yeah, that's bullshit.
Why would she want to take credit? I mean,
it makes it
totally destabilized her life. Why would she?
Yeah, because she did that often.
She did?
She took credit for things that she had nothing to do with. Yeah, she didn't have anything to do with that. What happened was I went to a supermarket to get some toothpicks because I had stopped smoking. And I was trying to quit smoking cigarettes, so I was chewing toothpicks. So I went into the supermarket to get some toothpicks. And at the checkout stand, there was a copy of Glamour, a magazine I never heard of, frankly. And on the cover was this girl, and she had a shirt on that said, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you, all over the shirt. But I thought to myself, her look on her face belies the sentiment. She doesn't look like she really does love me. She looks like she maybe doesn't love me in the picture. So I bought the magazine, gave it to my assistant, Mae Woods, and I said, find out who this girl is.
I think if you read the book that talked about that period in cinema, Easy Riders, Raging Bulls, the impression that Peter Biskin makes, and the impression that I think that she supports, is that Polly was almost a teammate in your success, that these first three films that she was involved in, she was intimately involved in, almost, I don't know if she wants to say co-director, but this was something...
That's the impression she liked to give.
So, I mean, she died in 2011, so, I mean, we can't hear her version of it, but you've obviously heard this before.
Yeah, she lied.
Tell me.
It took credit for more than she deserved. She deserved a lot of credit, but she didn't direct anything. She was very fun to bounce things off of and had good ideas and had nothing to do with casting or directing. She had to do with production design. She was trying to take credit for things that she didn't deserve. Maybe because she didn't get enough credit for what she did do.
Mm-hmm. This love affair, I mean, it was, memorialized. I think that, were the two of you on the cover of People?
Yeah.
Did you pose for it?
Yeah. Oh, no, yeah, we did, yeah. We were also on the cover of Los Angeles magazine, where she was sticking her tongue out at the camera.
Yeah. People
didn't like that. I showed Orson the copy of People, and he leafed through it. He said, I don't know if I like this.
Why?
Well, he thought it was dangerous.
How so?
Because people hate me for it. They did. They hated us.
So it seems like people were telling you all along the way, but did you ignore them?
Kind of.
Do you see a lot of movies still, contemporary movies?
No.
You don't?
I'm fed up with most movies.
Yeah?
Well, this superhero shit is so boring to me. And once they've established that in special effects they can do anything, who gives a shit? It's just special effects. One of the great things about movies is that they are a great recording device for things that happen. So when you see Astaire and Rogers dancing, it's not tricks. There's no special effects. And there's only one shot. That big dance number that they do for example, in Swing Time, it's done in 2 shots. That's part of the glory of movies, that you're seeing something that was actually happened. So it's almost like a documentary of that moment. Now that they can do anything in special effects, who gives a shit? It's all fake.
Well, this was actually, I was reading over some of what, Burt Reynolds' memoirs. And one of his complaints about, was it At Long Last Love? Is that what it was? Was that you guys shot it live. That he had to sing as though it were a live show and it was going to be one take. And he said, why, this is a movie. Why?
One shot, yeah.
And he felt like as a non-trained dancer and singer, it was putting a lot of pressure on him.
He could have turned it down.
Yeah.
If you're going to accept it, then shut up.
He said that he wrote that he was loaded through the whole picture.
Not true.
It's not true. He said he was drinking vodka and orange juice.
Maybe, but he didn't show.
Yeah.
I liked Burt, but he was his own worst enemy in a way.
He was a little ungrateful? Is that what?
Yeah, he's a bit of a prick.
He was not particularly nice years later when Orson was on The Tonight Show with him, right?
Yeah, that was shitty.
But was that
shitty moment?
We've talked on the show about that famous Sally Field quote, you like me, you really like me. But there was a point in the 70s where all of Hollywood seemed to be united in not liking and really not liking Bogdanovich. The director, Billy Wilder, once said, "It isn't true that Hollywood is a bitter place divided by hatred, greed, and jealousy. All it takes to bring the community together is a flop by Peter Bogdanovich." So a few minutes ago, we heard Burt Reynolds in 1974 taunting and on top of the world Bogdanovich. Now, almost 2 years later to the day, in July of 1976, Reynolds was guest hosting The Tonight Show and had Orson Welles on. Between these 2 shows, Reynolds had starred alongside Cybill Shepherd in At Long Last Love, which was Bogdanovich's second of 3 successive flops. And at the time that Welles was on The Tonight Show, Bogdanovich's third flop, Nickelodeon, had just opened, and the pair were having some fun at Bogdanovich's expense.
We have a mutual friend, of course, Peter Bogdanovich.
That's right.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, you have me to thank for the fact that you were asked to be in the picture which was probably the least successful of any in your past. My feeling was that the picture needed you.
Yeah. No, it needed a lot more.
That's right.
I had the distinction of getting him on this show and having him host the show.
How did you get him off?
Well, that was the thing.
Did you get a sense? I think that when you see this clip of him talking to Burt Reynolds after things have, gone south a little bit for you in Hollywood in terms of the films, that he is somehow enjoying your failure, that there is a bit of schadenfreude.
I think it was just true. I called him up, or I sent him a note, actually, after seeing that Burt Reynolds moment on The Tonight Show. Well, it was in the late 70s. Anyway. And I sent him a note saying, I tuned in last night to see what you and Burt were thinking. I guess I found out. Love, Peter. And then he sent me a few days later, I got a letter from him, which had 2 letters in an envelope, 2 letters. One was a long apology, that it was a betrayal, and it was a betrayal of and he's very apologetic and very sorry. That was one. And the other was a short note that said, you deserved it, basically. He said, take your pick.
I can understand the apology. What would be the reasoning behind you deserved it?
Well, he was jealous. I guess. I hadn't ever done anything against him.
Did you love? You must have loved him, right?
I loved Orson. Yeah. I think he loved me too, actually.
Did you know at this point that people might not have been rooting for you quite the way that one would hope that people would be rooting for you?
Sometime in the mid-'70s, Cary Grant called me. He says, Peter, will you, for Christ's sake, stop telling people you're happy and stop telling them you're in love? I said, this is when we were getting terrible press in the mid-'70s, Cybill and I said, why, Carrie? Because they're not happy and they're not in love. He was right.
You know, you grew up in New York. Your family is very interesting. Your father was an artist, correct?
Painter, yeah.
Painter.
Well, my mother taught herself to make frames, and this is what she did later in her life. She became a frame maker and framed my father's paintings. And then he died, and she continued to make paintings, but by then I was making pictures, and I was sort of taking care of her.
I read something, and I didn't know whether it could possibly be true, that you had... Did you have a brother die before you were born?
Yeah.
Can you tell me about that? What happened?
Well, I didn't even know about any of it till I was about 7. And I was in my father's living room where he also painted in the apartment. And I saw a sort of sketchy painting of a young boy with blonde hair. I said, who's that? He said, that's your brother. I said, my brother? Yes, he died. And he didn't say much else. I didn't ask him anything else. My mother never spoke of him. Then years later, when I was toward the end of my mother's life, I interviewed her. I asked her about this tragedy. She told me about it, but it was very difficult for her to talk about even then. Very difficult. She got choked up and she couldn't really go on. She did tell me what happened, but it was very painful for her.
I had heard that it was like an accident.
Yeah, it was an accident, yeah. Kitchen accident. The kid she was boiling some soup, and the kid got near the soup, and she got scared, and she went to try to stop him from touching the soup, and she accidentally, it fell on him. The soup poured on him, and he died of shock.
I cannot even imagine.
Terrible. Neither of them ever quite got over it. I don't know how they survived that moment, but it happened, I think, in 1938. The kid was a year and a half old. Tough. I was born into that tragedy, actually.
I can't. Was it the same? Was it the same apartment or the same home that you were in?
No, it was in Yugoslavia, the former Yugoslavia.
Oh, it was in.
Happened in the old country, and then they came to America. She was pregnant with me on the ship when they came over. And I was born, they came over in May, and I was born in July.
I just watched yesterday, too, again, Paper Moon, and that is phenomenal. Tatum and Ryan O'Neal.
It's Ryan's best performance, I think.
She is really amazing. I mean, both of them are, in fact.
Yeah, it was, I had a terrible time actually making that picture.
Why?
Because Polly was there. It was the last picture we did together, and we weren't getting along. Cybill wasn't allowed to come on set because Polly was doing it. So I was kind of unhappy about that. So I had not a pleasant time making the picture. In fact, it was so unpleasant that I finished 2 days ahead of schedule.
So were you basically at war with your wife?
Well, we didn't get along particularly. She was having an affair with somebody, but she didn't want me to know somebody on the picture. And I found out, I didn't really give a shit, but she didn't want me to know, and so she was very kind of guilty. And we got to this hotel in the story. Gorham, I think. Yeah, Gorham Hotel. And I said, you can't use that sign. It can't be Gorham. We've just been to Gorham in the railroad track. And she said, well, no, but it doesn't matter. I said, yes, it matters. This is a road picture. They moved. They're somewhere else. She says, nobody will notice. I said, change the fucking sign. And that was the kind of the end of the relationship.
It's very sad, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not great.
So let's talk about Orson. We've been hearing for decades about The Other Side of the Wind.
Yeah.
You know, you're essentially playing yourself. You're playing a version of yourself,
yeah.
But there's obviously, expressed the drama that exists between you. There's something, I guess, paternal about John Huston's character, Jake Hannaford. You know, Jake Hannaford, I think Wells at some point considered playing him, and he played him, and he read the lines to you, right? You actually played against him.
In that scene in the car, yeah.
In that scene in the car.
Yeah. In fact, Huston wasn't anywhere near us at that point. In that scene, it was just Orson and me, and he said to me, his direction to me was, "It's us."
3 months before Bogdanovich and I spoke, Netflix finally released The Other Side of the Wind, which was Orson Welles' unfinished film that had become the stuff of legend, as well as the subject of author Josh Karp's really fun making-of book called Orson Welles' Last Movie, which you really ought to track down. Anyway, in The Other Side of the Wind, Bogdanovich plays a version of himself named Brooks Otterlake, who's a successful one-time protege of the Welles-like character Jake Hannaford, a director who, like Welles, was near the end of his life and his career. Welles was originally going to play Hannaford, but instead gave the role over to John Huston. And if you could believe this, Rich Little initially played the Bogdanovich Otterlake character until Welles discovered mid-shoot that the impressionist couldn't act. So he fired Rich Little and hired Bogdanovich, who was then at the height of his mid-70s celebrity, to come in and reshoot his scenes. Huston was long gone from the set by the time they filmed this night scene with Otterlake talking to Hannaford through a car window. Welles was reading Hannaford's lines off camera, telling off his disciple who has surpassed him. It's by far the best scene of the movie, and I admit, the other day, rewatching it, I teared up.
But this rough magic he here abjures. Take back that last, it doesn't fit.
What does abjure me? You went to Harvard.
Give up.
Is that a suggestion?
Abjure, he knows what it means.
I gave up in the 7th grade. How about you?
Never. Not even then. And I didn't learn my Shakespeare at Harvard.
Mr. Otterfield here wanted to be an actor. Then he saw one of my films. We all read the interview.
He is a rough magician, isn't he?
You can kiss my sweet ass.
What did I do wrong, Daddy? Our revels now are ended.
You bet your sweet cheeks.
During The Other Side of the Wind, there are some scenes that are used in The Other Side of the Wind where your house wasn't in Bel Air, was it? It was
It was Bel Air on Copa d'Oro.
estate.
Yeah, it was a sizable house. Yeah.
So Orson, shot some of The Other Side of the Wind, but also took up residence, correct, in your home.
I asked him if he wanted to stay with us because he had no place to stay except hotels.
Was he broke at that point?
Kind of. Not broke, but he wasn't flush. He had his own wing. And do you know the story about when Cybill smelled smoke? Do you know the story?
Tell me the story.
She was walking past where Orson's wing, and she smelled smoke. She said, "Orson, I smell something burning. Are you all right?" He said, "Yes, I'd like a little privacy, please." So the housekeeper, later on, Cybill left, and Orson went somehow for the day. And the housekeeper said, "Mr. B?" I said, "Yeah." "Mr. Welles had an accident." I said, "What happened?" He said, "I don't know." And she holds up this white terry cloth robe with a big burn hole. And what turned out had happened, he'd been smoking a cigar and he put it in his pocket of his robe, not realizing it was still lit, and the robe caught on fire. He took it off and threw it into the bathtub, but missed the bathtub, and it burned some of the carpet in the bathroom. And he said he would fix it, and he never did, but it doesn't matter. And a couple of days later, about 3 days later, he gave Cybill a present, a very beautifully wrapped book about opera, because she loves opera, and it had lovely color pictures. And he'd drawn in the front, he'd drawn a picture of a house burning and a ladybug screaming. And he wrote, "Ladybug, ladybug, fly away home. Your house is on fire, and so is your house guest." I love Orson. And he was there off and on for about 3 years, but he wasn't there all the time. He'd leave and then come back. I loved having him around.
Is it true that you were offered both The Godfather and The Exorcist?
Yeah. Yeah, I was. And The Way We Were, and Chinatown, and just about everything. I was hot.
Why did you turn all those? I mean, do you feel like...
No, I didn't feel I did a mistake. I wasn't interested. Paramount called me and said, we just bought a new Mario Puzo book called The Godfather. We'd like you to consider directing it. I said, what's it about? The mafia. I said, well, I'm not interested in the mafia. That was the end of the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Exorcist 2?
Well, I don't like that kind of movie. I saw the movie when Billy made it. He did a good job with it, but it wasn't my kind of movie. I don't like horror movies. I wasn't interested in the subject matter. I never even read it.
It seems like you were not of that clique at all, and it doesn't seem like there's any kind of love lost between you and these guys.
No.
What is it? Why?
I like Francis. Billy and I didn't get along particularly well.
You had a company briefly with Billy and
Francis, yeah.
And Francis.
Yeah.
One of the quotes that Billy says about you, I mean, there were many people who felt like you casting Cybill in pictures was a mistake. He once said that called you pussy struck.
Pussy whipped?
No, he said pussy struck.
That's a crude way of putting it.
He said that Cybill didn't have the acting ability and that you had somehow lost your mind by.
She's very good in the 3 pictures we did together.
Yeah.
4 pictures. She's very good. She's very good in Daisy Miller, which got great reviews from the Times and Newsweek, and they all praised her performance. Richard Brody in the New Yorker did an amazing piece about it recently, about Daisy Miller and how good she is in the picture. She's very good in the movie.
So why did they?
Because they were pissed off that I was having an affair with her. I've seen pictures of us. I looked like an arrogant, attractive guy, and she looked like a sexy girl. And we were rich, and we were famous, and we did movies together. People like Burt Reynolds was right. People get to hate you.
Yeah. Even the directors.
Yeah, everybody's envious, jealousy. You know, when River Phoenix died, was one of the great kids. Tony Curtis was quoted. They asked him about it, and he said, what's the line? It is impossible to gauge the amount of envy there is in Hollywood. It's all, town is built on that. Jealousy, envy, those wonderful twins of 7.
Were you in love through the whole thing? I mean, did she break your heart?
Kind of. Yeah.
All I know is that you didn't get married. She got married fairly soon after that, though, right?
Yeah. For the first time. And then she had the child. And then she got divorced. And then she got married again and had twins. And one time I was visiting over there, and her kids, her three kids were there, and she was there, and she turned to the kids and said, you know, I was with this man longer than both your fathers put together. She was with me for 8.5 years.
Was it wonderful?
Most of the time.
Was it tempestuous?
It was sexy.
Sexy.
Yeah.
So why'd she leave? What happened?
Well, I was screwing around in Singapore, which has happened during St. John, and she came to visit, and she sort of got what was going on.
Okay, so you and because I knew that you and Ben Gazzara hung out in Singapore. Were you guys like going to the hookers there? Is that right?
We'd invite them over.
How did that work?
We'd call the madam, and Benny would call the madam, Mama, send over 2 girls, and we did that a lot. Yeah. The book was all about a pimp trying to start a whorehouse, and the trouble was there were no women in the book. There was no characters really, so we had to put some female characters in this, some hookers and so on. So we started seeing hookers to talk to them about it and talk to them about what's going on, and both Benny and I did that.
But talk to them and sleep with them.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you pay them or was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
One girl was the first one actually that I had. Whose name I can't remember now, but she was very sweet, and she told me her story, and she didn't speak English really at all, and she was quite dark. She was almost black. She was from Malaysia, I think so. Anyway, she told me her story, which was sad. They all had sad stories, and I felt bad for her. And I gave her $5,000 to go home, and she did. She went home. The last thing she said to me when she was leaving the room, leaving the hotel, she said, "I look for you in Bangkok," is where she was going. I said, "Okay," and I used that line in the picture. "I look for you in Ceylon." I liked her. I liked all the hookers. They were all really nice kids.
Did you feel bad at all? I mean, I feel like.
Well, I gave them a lot of money.
Yeah.
send them home. There's another girl named Mary Lynn. I gave her 5 or 10 grand and actually cast her in the picture too.
Did it feel exploitive at all, or does it feel, because it's interesting because ultimately you did a movie with Owen Wilson, and you kind of repeat that where one of the plot lines is he is the hero of the picture and he's a director, and he ends up in the first scene you see him sleeping with a call girl, and she seems to really enjoy the sex, which I just don't know if do hookers enjoy the sex? I assumed that they don't.
Good.
What?
If it's
come
good.
on, really?
Yeah.
You don't think it's just an acting role for them?
Maybe.
Well,
I don't think so.
Imogen Poots was the call girl with Owen Wilson, and she is really apparently stunned by the sex. And so they have sex, and then he says, I don't want you to do this with anyone else. If I give you money, will you go off? And
that's what happened to me. I did that to two or three girls in Singapore. That's where that idea came from. In fact, I had the idea based on that to do that movie. That I did that. I gave them 5 or 10 grand at that time if they promised they would stop being hookers and go home. And I checked on it too, and they all got out of the business. Now, Cybill came to visit, and I think she picked up the fact that I was having an affair with Monica Subramaniam, who played the leading girl. And Cybill figured it out that I was having an affair. She got very upset and she left. I didn't know what was going on with her, but I remember she looking like she cried a lot. So she went home and had an affair with this guy in Memphis and got pregnant.
What did he do, this guy?
That was a very funny moment when she told me about it. I said, "What is he, a mechanic?" She said, "Yes, as a matter of fact."
You're kind of, with all due respect, you're sort of terrible at cheating. It seems like you get caught over and over again.
Well, I don't know how to put this, but after Cybill and I got to it, I thought, Jesus Christ, this is different than I ever thought it could be. And so after that, I just didn't want to be alone anymore.
Wait, I don't understand. Explain that to me again.
Sex. Suddenly had sex was different. Well, she got me stoned for the first time, which didn't hurt exactly.
Yeah.
And it increased everything. So we had some good times. And after that, I just didn't want to be alone at night on a picture.
I see.
So I found somebody to be with if Cybill couldn't be there.
But don't you have people on set who are production assistants that hide your girlfriend when your wife comes around?
That what?
That hide your girlfriend when the wife comes around?
Well, I don't think that I don't think anybody told her, but maybe they did. I don't know what happened, but I got home from making the picture in Singapore, thinking I was going to get back. Cybill and I were still living together, and she basically left. I think the next day, said she's going back to Memphis, and I remember throwing an ashtray down on the ground, a glass ashtray which shattered, and I was very upset about it. Wrote the first draft of They All Laughed. The John Ritter character spent the entire picture mooning about a girl he'd lost until I met Dorothy.
Dorothy, of course, is Dorothy Stratten. If Cybill Shepherd's influence had a profound, even destabilizing effect on Bogdanovich's early career, Stratton's presence was even more disruptive. But it's important to remember he only knew Stratten for less than a year. If you happen not to know the story, you're going to hear most of it in a minute. But Bogdanovich cast 1980 Playboy Playmate of the Year Dorothy Stratten for a small role in They All Laughed, his follow-up to 1979's St. Jack. Though, although sexual hijinks in Asia you just heard about blew up his relationship with Cybill Shepherd, St. Jack came out, it got rave reviews, and was received as Bogdanovich's great comeback, his return to form. Predictably, Bogdanovich began carrying on a secret affair with Stratten, who was then married to a small-time Canadian pimp named Paul Snyder. On August 14th, 1980, Snyder lured her to a rented house in West LA to discuss dissolving their marriage. What followed was just an unspeakable crime. Snyder shot Stratten in the face with a shotgun, then turned the gun on himself. Stratton's autopsy showed that she'd been sodomized, but it wasn't clear if it had happened before or after she'd been murdered. Bogdanovich was naturally inconsolable, but might have also felt either relief or survivor's guilt. Cops were discovered that Snyder had been lurking around Bogdanovich's gate with a handgun in the weeks before the murder. Bogdanovich, by his own admission and quite understandably, went a little nuts. After They All Laughed died in theaters in its initial 1980 run, he spent every dime he had buying it back from Fox so he could re-release it. He wrote a book about Stratton and the murder called The Killing of the Unicorn, which blamed the culture of Playboy magazine for Stratton's death and even accused Hugh Hefner of rape. The reviews were not kind. Then, in 1985, he filed for bankruptcy. In 1990, he had to leave his beloved Bel Air mansion after it went into foreclosure. Side note, Diane Keaton ended up living there, and not long ago it sold for $16 million. So, just as Welles had ended up crashing at Bogdanovich's when he was broke, so did Bogdanovich end up spending years in the guest houses of Quentin Tarantino and Brett Ratner.
Well, I want to talk about Dorothy a little bit, but I also want to talk, I mean, it blew my mind to find out about When They All Laughed. Because Patty Hansen was in They All Laughed. Dorothy Stratten, who you were in love with and having an affair with at the time, and also...
We didn't actually have an affair until after the picture started. We just kissed.
But it was also, the third woman who was the singer.
Colleen
Camp. So you had dated both Colleen and Patty Hansen.
Yeah.
And then you were in love, obviously.
Getting to know your actors. Yeah, Colleen and I had broken up, but...
But when did that...
Well, that was somewhere after Cybill. Oh, I know what it was. It's too complicated. At some point during the time that Polly and I were sort of on the outs, and I was with Cybill, I saw an ad about, I think it was Benson and Hedges ad, where they had the long cigarettes or something. And Colleen was in one of the ads in a bathing suit, and I said to Frank Marshall, see if you can find that girl. I want to see who she is. I met her and I liked her, and we had a very brief, one-night stand. She was going with somebody and I was going with Cybill. And I wrote a part for her because I liked her and I think she was funny. So then Colleen and I when she broke up and I broke up with Cybill, we had a brief thing. And then she went to do Apocalypse Now, and she got involved with the production designer of that. Yeah, well, what happened with Patty, I saw her on the cover of a magazine, I think it was Esquire, and I wanted to meet her. And I met her at the hotel, wherever it was, and we were attracted to each other, and we had a quick affair. It went on for a month or two. It was before we shot They All Laugh, so it must have been in 78 or 79, somewhere in there.
Uh-huh.
It didn't work. It was a kind of a conflict of drugs. She was into coke and I wasn't, and I liked grass, but I didn't like coke at all. And she liked coke, she didn't like grass. So conflicting drugs.
Yeah.
And I liked her a lot, but I wasn't in love with her, and she wasn't in love with me. I wrote the part for her in the script.
Mm-hmm. Did part of you love the idea of mixing it up with all sorts of women who you had been involved with? Was that...
Well, I felt that...
there's a screwball aspect.
It is a screwball aspect.
Right?
Yeah, definitely. Also, I wrote the parts for them because I knew them. So anyway, Patty and I broke up. I was very depressed. And then I met Dorothy, and fell in love with her.
You met her. Now you had been, you knew Hef, and you had been going...
I was not a guy that hung around much at the mansion, but I certainly had been there quite a number of times. What happened was, I went to the mansion and hadn't been there for a while, and this was in 78. And somebody introduced me to Dorothy, and I thought, that's the most beautiful girl I've ever met, I've ever seen. I gave her my phone number and said, I'm casting a picture, give me a call. She never did.
Do you think that that's a line that women hear a lot at the mansion?
Yes,
I'm casting a picture.
It was really cliche, but I didn't know what else to say.
Was it the truth at that point, or?
Yeah, I was casting St. Jack, but I was full of shit about it. She wasn't right for anything.
Yeah.
Nothing happened. I just went to make St. Jack, came back, and about exactly a year later, I was around Halloween. I walked into the mansion, and I heard somebody call my name, Peter, and I looked around, and this girl came running up to me, and her hair was bleached blonde, and when she got close, I realized it was Dorothy. And that's how we met. And then we started talking on the phone a lot, and then we started seeing each other.
You eventually cast her. You wrote the part for her, correct?
Oh yeah, there was a part in the script, but it was very brief. And the part that was in the script, that character, was only in 2 scenes. So then Dorothy and I really felt for her and expanded that part at the beginning into the whole script. And she's married, all that. It's basically Dorothy and me.
So you included this role. I mean, you included this role, and that for Dorothy, and it sort of mirrors your own situation. But there's a husband in the picture. She is married in it to somebody who she's obviously not in love with. It must have been based on her own situation, correct?
Yeah. Based on the outlines of her situation. I didn't know the real story about that.
Did you think that eventually this would be complicated when the movie came out? If her husband, regardless of whether he was violent,
he found out about us.
That would be fair.
But she that wasn't the problem. That wasn't what caused the murder. It was out of the blue, you know.
But he was also upset that you were having an affair with
Well, he
her.
wasn't thrilled, but...
Now, Hefner in 1985 held a press conference. He said that you had caused his stroke because of this book.
Well, I destroyed him. I destroyed the whole Playboy myth, which, by the way, was a myth.
You wrote a book in which basically I think that you were called a feminist after because...
Well, I became one. If I hadn't been before. I'd always...
But you didn't necessarily renounce having gone there. I mean, you would never have met her had you not been to the...
Yeah, she said that to me.
What?
DR said that.
Said that you never would have met me had I not been in Playboy?
Yeah, right. And I said, we would have met sometime. I said, but she was right. The so-called sexual revolution of the late 50s and 60s was just another way of making it easier for guys to get laid. Well, they weren't feminists. They weren't trying to help women. They were...
But
it devolved.
But you were a bit of a beneficiary, no?
I guess I was to a degree. You know. Well, I wasn't Prince Charming. You know, I was very nice to the women, but it was that period of time when everybody was into sex.
Do you regret it?
A little bit.
When I got in touch with Bogdanovich, I had no idea where he was living. The Copa d'Oro house in Bel Air had been gone since 1990. I wasn't sure if he might still be crashing in Brett Ratner's guest house. Bogdanovich had been divorced since 2001. In 1988, he'd married Dorothy Stratten's 20-year-old sister Louise, who he'd met when Dorothy brought her along on a date on New Year's Day, 1980. That day, Louise was 11 and a half. Bogdanovich told me that he and Louise came to refer to that date as their anniversary. Unsurprisingly, their marriage was a huge tabloid story at the time. People magazine devoted a cover to it, called it Tale of Two Sisters, and alleged that Bogdanovich had turned Louise into his project. He'd paid for her modeling school, even gotten her plastic surgery to make Louise resemble her dead sister. The reporter tracked down Nellie Hoog Stratten, Dorothy's mother, in Vancouver and broke the news that the two had been married. She was not happy. She was quoted as saying, "I feel he wants her because of a guilt trip. If he is in love with one daughter, how can he be in love with the other daughter?" I happened to have just read that story when I showed up to his address. A small, cramped apartment in Toluca Lake. It was not a fancy dwelling. Bogdanovich was frail but dapper, wearing one of his signature bandanas around his neck. People often refer to it as an ascot, but he actually started wearing a bandana while shooting the Last Picture Show. It was an homage to how actors like John Wayne dressed in classic westerns. We spoke in a small living room. There were boxes all over as though the residents might be in transit. I soon learned that after leaving Casa Ratner, he had moved in with Louise Stratten, who was nowhere to be seen but called his cell phone often. But then I heard footsteps come down the stairs and Bogdanovich rushed to throw some papers on top of my copy of The Killing of the Unicorn. It was only then that I learned that Nellie, Dorothy and Louise's mother, was living there too. So if you hear some TV bleeding into the audio, don't hold it against Nellie. It was a small apartment and she's been through a lot.
Not long ago.
Hide that book, will you?
What's that?
Hide the cover.
Oh, gosh, I'm so sorry.
Sorry. She didn't see it. Turn on the light now. Turn on the light. You okay?
Yeah.
Thank you, darling. And
You have water for that?
yeah. Oh, yeah, that's great, Tom. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Mel.
You're welcome.
She, by the way, that's Dorothy's mother who you met. Did you meet an older woman?
No.
Oh, she's... Yes, darling.
Can I interrupt and ask if you can phone Demand.
Oh.
Demand on the TV.
I can try her. Demand.
On Demand. Do you want me to try?
You know how
You
to
want me to
do
go
it?
look at it?
Would you like Andrew to take a look at it? He seems to know what he's talking about.
I'm happy to look.
Okay, I don't know. If you want to.
Give it a shot. Go up the stairs. That's Nellie, by the way.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi, Nellie. Andrew, how are you? Nice to
Is it good?
let me try. Yeah, thank you. All right.
Did it work?
Yeah. Okay. So,
That is Dorothy's mother.
so
If she comes down, don't mention her name.
maybe we should
Dorothy's name.
talk about it some
She
other
can't.
time.
She can't hear anything now.
Oh, she can't now. So
A little deaf.
okay, I'm a little deaf too.
But
in
if
this
she
ear,
comes
so-
down and just
Okay. You know, you write in the book, and it's very sweet. You write as though you would have been with her forever. You had like a 10-month affair. I mean, obviously,
Well,
things
it was not 10 months.
things change. I mean, but do you think that you definitely would have been together for the rest of your lives?
Yeah.
What was it?
She was a very special girl. So is her sister, Louise is a wonderful girl. They're like two people I've never met before. Actually, I don't know how to describe her, Dorothy. She was just such a brilliantly beautiful girl, and also very, very smart and very sensitive, and funny, and had a great sense of humor and good actress.
Yeah. After one on the attack, he said that you had been inappropriately getting close to her family. Did he?
Her family?
Dorothy's family. Did he imply that you had been involved with her mother as well?
Yeah, that was bullshit. That was bullshit. I invited them to stay, and they said that I had somebody work on operating on Louise to make her look more like Dorothy, which is complete bullshit.
But he said that you were having an affair with her when she was 13. You ultimately did marry her.
Yeah, that's true. No, it's all bullshit.
So when did you fall in love?
Sometime in there, we were, as I said, somewhere. It's like a shipwreck. Mm-hmm. We both ended up hanging on to the same piece of driftwood, and we saw that we loved each other. You know, when Dorothy was killed, nobody called me from Hollywood. Nobody, except the people who worked on the picture and knew her or something like that. But nobody called me except Cary Grant.
Nobody called?
No, not one person.
Why?
Didn't want to touch it. Murder. After she was killed. After it happened, I didn't go out much, and for about 2 years. And one day, about 6 months after it happened, I went to have a dentist appointment. And as I'm leaving the dentist, who's coming up the street but Billy Wilder? I had, "Hi, Billy." He says, "Hi." Without even a blink, he says, "You know that whole story about that girl that got murdered? It's not the plot is not right. It should be." And he starts to tell me how to fix the plot of the story of Dorothy's murder. And I thought,
Wait, what?
Yeah, I know. This is, I said, beyond German bad taste. It's just unbelievably bad taste.
What did Orson say?
Nothing. Never spoke to Orson about it. I wasn't talking to Orson much then. I saw him later. I talked to him later, about a week and a half, 2 weeks before he died. I said, "Jesus, Orson, this is in 85. I feel like I made so many mistakes." And he said, "Well, it does seem to be difficult to go through life without making a great many of them," which was our kind of way of rekindling our friendship. Last time we spoke.
What do you think the mistakes were?
I just blew it because I was so depressed. I didn't give a shit. I just didn't give a shit. I wanted to die in some way. I wanted to forget it, just end it all. But I didn't. I just...
Are you talking about after Dorothy?
Yeah.
It was in the papers, but you had some financial issues. You bought. They all laughed back from the studio.
That was a crazy thing.
Did you?
Which is
I
all
mean,
I
you were
had.
trying. It was a comedy, Did you anticipate that, regardless of the quality of the movie? I mean, the movie got some good reviews, but did you anticipate that it was going to be hard to market a movie that
Yes,
that
in fact,
introduced a woman who had just been murdered?
Yeah, of course. I remember when I heard about it after I fell apart, and I thought, our child is dead too. I didn't think it would do well. You know, exactly what you just said, but I bought it anyway.
Was there something suicidal about that?
A little bit, yeah. But also, I wanted to give it a chance, and I didn't think Fox would give it a chance. For example, we wanted to be in Westwood because it's very good for kids. UCLA is right nearby, right? And we opened in Westwood, and we beat everybody at the box office that first week. But the next week it was pulled because Paramount wanted to put beds in there, and they're going to be nice to Paramount rather than me. So they pulled the picture. So that's how you get fucked. You can't self-distribute. They'll fuck you every time if they can. If they want something you have, they'll take it. I lost $5 million, had to move eventually. Quite a while later, I moved out of my house in Bel Air.
Was it hard to leave that house?
Yeah. We still talk about it. It's a nice house.
Who's we?
LB and I, Louise and I.
Oh, she remembers that. Oh, she stayed there.
Yeah, she
well,
replaced.
when People magazine put you on the cover, it was as though you were. I mean, they treated you as a pervert. I mean, it was sort of a
tale of two sisters.
I think that probably what people reacted to was the fact that she had been very young when you first met.
I met her when she was 11 and a half. Dorothy brought her over to the house on New Year's Day in 1980. It was natural. We fell in love. We loved Dorothy. We were both tragically felt lost without her, and we just got close and eventually got married. Why they made such a big deal out of the fact that I married her sister, when in fact, why not? There's a line in a famous song by Frank Sinatra. Mm-hmm. You can't resist her. Sorry for you. She has no sister. No one can ever replace.
Why'd you guys break up?
Well, you know, she was young when we got married. She was about 20. She needed to see the world out there. I tried to save her from the shits in the world, the male shits in the world, by marrying her, by us getting married, you know.
Oh, it's so interesting. It seems like there's sort of a theme, saving people.
Saving people, yeah. Maybe it is. I hadn't thought of it that way.
Really?
Not quite. I guess it is something I've done a few times, yeah.
You weren't excited about the projects that came out about Dorothy? Star 80.
Well, Star 80 was a complete ridiculous. It was a terrible movie. I called Bob, and I knew Bob Fosse. And then I heard he was making Star 80, and I called him and I said, "Is it true you're making a movie about DR?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Why are you doing that?" So we think it's a good story. I said, "Well, you don't know what the story is because I don't know it. So how the fuck do you know what it is?" Well, we think it's not about you, it's about her. I said, "I'm not going to think it's about me. I don't give a shit about that." And he said, "Well, I said, "Let me just put it this way, Bob. If it had happened to you, I wouldn't do a movie about it." Killed him. Movie didn't do well, and it was the last picture you did. You shouldn't have done it.
You think the movie killed him?
Well, it didn't do anything. I think that didn't help his
career.
Yeah.
How many years after that did he die?
Just a couple of years.
Oh, it was just a couple of years? His career died, and then he...
Pretty much, yeah. Mm-hmm. It was a terrible movie. And the first time I appear on the screen under a different name, he says to her, "So what do you know about me?" I thought to myself, okay, Bob, I get it. You're a fucking asshole, too. Jealous, envious.
Bogdanovich never won an Oscar, but he will be remembered as the consummate filmmaker's filmmaker. He was so beloved by a younger generation of directors, some of them even housed him for extended periods of time. Quentin Tarantino once referred to They All Laughed as the best movie ever made. It's also a favorite of Wes Anderson's and Noah Baumbach, who Bogdanovich told me would often address him as daddy. At the very end of our 4-hour talk, Bogdanovich's phone rang again, but it wasn't Louise this time. It was a recent Oscar nominee.
I was in the fucking hospital. Spike Lee.
Spike Lee is calling you?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Hello? Hey, how you doing, Spike?
This is Spike.
I know your name came up on my computer here.
How you doing, sir?
I'm doing all right. Congratulations on your nomination, love.
Well, thank you very much. I just want to call you and tell you I value your friendship and your great movies.
Oh, you're very sweet, Spike.
And when all this stuff is done, I really just sit down with you and talk about cinema.
Let's do that. I'd love to talk to you. I'd love to. I loved your movie. I think it's brilliantly done. Brilliantly.
Thank you very much.
The sense of humor.
It means so much to me. And so when all this stuff cools down, I'll be back here, whether you're in New York and I'm in LA. Let's do that, okay?
I'd love to see that. Let's both promise.
All right. Take care, sir.
Love to see you, Spike. Good luck.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, love. I sent him a thank you. I sent him a congratulations. I think.
Did you actually see Black Klansman?
Yeah, I did. I liked
Oh,
it.
you did? You weren't just...
No, I wasn't bullshitting. I liked it. I thought it was well made.
So you're going to direct again?
Yeah, I'm going to do a picture.
What is it?
Wait for me.
Tell me about it again.
Well, it's about a famous movie director, writer, actor. It's kind of like John Cassavetes, but famous for comedies.
Mm-hmm.
So like Woody Allen, but he's not anything like Woody. And he's famous. He's been married 6 times, and he has 6 daughters. And his last wife was killed in a plane crash 6 years before the movie begins. He punched out an executive at Fox. He chopped up a projection room at Universal, which, by the way, Cassavetes did.
You did that?
Yeah. And he's persona non grata in Hollywood. And you first meet him coming on a train into Rome, where he's been bullshitting the Italians for 6 months, using their money and going all over Italy and Spain and Sicily, looking for locations for a script that doesn't exist and a story that doesn't have a story. Meanwhile, one of his daughters has been touring with a rock star. She disappears. They don't know where she went. That's the beginning. You meet all those wives. You meet all those his daughters. You meet 6 friends. There's 6 ghosts in it. 6 ghosts appear. It's a very complicated script. It moves like a bat out of hell. It's very fast. And it's very challenging, but I'm dying to make it.
That's our episode. If you liked it, please rate, subscribe, leave a review, and tell all the Bogdanovich fans in your life. This episode was produced by myself, Andrew Goldman, as well as Rob Heath, who might have only been 1 when Billy Wilder died, but boy did Billy Wilder hate that baby. Special thanks to the Boston Globe's Mark Shanahan, who included our little show in his year-end roundup of favorite podcasts. We are truly honored. Thanks also to Lane Brown, the editor who gave me the Bogdanovich assignment, and Jonathan Kirshner over at the Mid-Century Cinema blog, who's been very kind in sharing my work. Thanks to the entire team at Los Angeles Magazine, notably Joseph Kapsch, Maddie Wells, and Silver Fox editor Meir Rashan. My condolences to Peter's daughters, Antonia and Sashi Bogdanovich, as well as Louise Stratten and Nellie Hoog Stratten. The Originals is, as always, a highly replaceable production.